I have seen many kinds of women in my life. I have seen women in African tribes who live outside the norms of Western fashion, women whose strength is expressed through their culture and their community, not their external appearance. I have seen movie actresses carefully molded to represent an ideal of beauty defined by money, the media, and male fantasy. I have seen models trained to walk, pose, and seduce the gaze of others. And I have also seen the common woman. The woman who raises children, keeps a home, grows old, stops wearing makeup, no longer fits into tight clothes, and never wears high heels. I have seen women who wear pants and t-shirts, who don't wear makeup, who are heterosexual, who have children, and who feel no need to transform their appearance to please others. These women live without spectacle. They are not less feminine for that. They are not less real. They simply don't appear in the media because their existence doesn't feed the market, fantasy, or control. But I have also seen something else. Something that must be said clearly, directly, without euphemisms, and without self-censorship. When people born with male bodies transition as trans women, a large portion of them begin a process focused almost entirely on outward appearance. Not all, but many. And we are told not to notice it. We are told that this is identity, that this is truth. But what I see, what is impossible to deny, is that many of these individuals are not trying to resemble common women, but exaggerated versions of femininity, built from superficial definitions of what a woman is supposed to be. It's about high heels, excessive makeup, padded bras, miniskirts, forced curves, retouched selfies, salon hairstyles, and constant theatricality in front of the camera. This is not a transition into a real experience of femininity, but into a character. And that character is not based on the complex, contradictory, and sometimes exhausting reality of being a woman. It is based on male fantasy, on cultural stereotypes, and an obsession with aesthetics. Many trans women say they were deeply affected by gender norms in their childhood. But instead of rejecting those norms, many adopt them in the most extreme way possible, as if the only way to leave behind their original gender was to cling desperately to the opposite stereotype. Rarely, if ever, have I seen a trans woman want to look like that woman who doesn't wear makeup, doesn't shave, throws on worn-out jeans, and ties her hair back to keep it out of the way. That woman, who represents the majority of real women, is absent from trans spaces. The feminine ideal that dominates these spaces is theatrical, sexualized, oriented toward the external gaze, obsessed with being liked. Makeup and heels are not accessories. They are treated as essential. And when this behavior is broken down to its most basic parts, something uncomfortable is exposed. For many people, being a woman has been reduced to a visual identity, to a mirror, to a selfie, to a tight dress, to a filter. This obsession with aesthetics is not harmless. It sends a message to the world, to other trans people, to women, and especially to the youth, that being a woman is about being seen, being desired, being validated. Not thinking, not acting, not existing. Just looking good. And being liked. The problem is not that a trans woman wears lipstick. The problem is when her entire identity is defined by wearing lipstick. When lipstick becomes the core of her existence. When womanhood is reduced to what's on the outside, and not to what is lived from within. I know many trans women undergo surgeries to feel better, to relieve dysphoria, to feel at home in their bodies. I don't deny that reality. But I also know many biological women who live with discomfort about their bodies and never have surgery. They don't like their nose or their breasts or their hips, but they accept them. They don't transform their bodies to fit an ideal. They live in them as part of their story, not because they are more authentic, but because they were raised in a society that teaches women to endure, to cope, to adapt to pain. For them, being a woman is not something that needs to be proven through transformation. It's a reality imposed on them from birth, one they could never escape. I also know that trans and non-binary people were often victims of bullying, exclusion, humiliation. Many grew up with a deep desire for acceptance, belonging, recognition. I do not ignore that suffering. I understand the urge to want to be seen, to be loved, to be embraced by those around them. But what happens in many trans spaces, especially on social media, is that this desire for validation turns into a theater of bodies. If you go into any large online trans group, what you find are hundreds of images of people posing, suggesting, displaying, asking for praise. The focus is placed almost entirely on physical appearance, not on political thought, not on existential analysis, not on the deeper meaning of gender. Just bodies. Bodies offered in exchange for applause, for hearts, for affirmation. And that is dangerous. Not because those people don't have the right to express themselves, but because those spaces are also where the general public goes to try to understand what it means to be trans. And when what they find is a flood of sexualized and superficial images, they leave with the wrong idea. They don't leave with compassion. They don't leave with understanding. They leave with the belief that being a trans woman is about appearance, fetish, exaggerated femininity. Nothing more. That's how ignorance is perpetuated. Meanwhile, women, real women, who have been treated as objects their whole lives, who have fought for decades to be recognized as more than wives, mothers, or sex symbols, see this spectacle and feel insulted. They rightly perceive that their struggle is being undone by people who reduce womanhood to a mix of beauty and decoration. And they feel betrayed. The media worsens this problem. When a trans woman appears on television or in an interview, the discussion is almost always about her appearance. What does she look like now? How much did she change? Is it noticeable? Is she attractive? Did she have surgery? Is she real? The headlines revolve around the transformation, not the thinking. Around her curves, not her studies. Around her clothes, not her causes. Trans women are treated as spectacles, not as citizens. And in that spectacle, the person disappears. The human being is erased. Complexity vanishes. Worse still, some trans women want to go so unnoticed that no one realizes they're trans. They want their identity to become invisible. While that may be understandable as a defense mechanism in a violent world, it also contributes to a culture of erasure. It reinforces the idea that trans people are only acceptable if they hide, if they simulate, if they disappear. But invisibility is not dignity. Erasure is not freedom. And then there are public figures like Caitlyn Jenner, who once said in an interview that being a woman was hard because she never knew what shoes to wear in the morning. That statement is not just absurd, it's a low blow. For most women in the world, being a woman is hard because of poverty, violence, abuse, discrimination, unsupported motherhood, underpaid work, harassment, exploitation, and invisibility. Shoes have nothing to do with it. Being a woman is not a wardrobe crisis. It's a social condition, a history, a burden, a fight to be recognized as more than just a body. No one looks at a woman in pants, sneakers, and no makeup and says she isn't a woman. She's accepted because her identity is not in what she wears, but in who she is. But when a trans woman wears the same clothes she wore before her transition, many people question her identity. And that is hypocrisy. If a woman is not defined by makeup or clothes, then a trans woman should not be defined by changing them either. This must be said bluntly. The current representation of trans women, especially on social media and in the media, reinforces the worst stereotypes about women. It feeds the idea that being a woman is a visual identity, that femininity is a performance, and that sexualization is a mandatory part of gender. This is not progress. It is a new version of an old lie. It harms women. It harms trans people. And it harms any society that wants to evolve beyond appearances toward dignity. Being a woman, whether cis or trans, is not about being looked at. It's not about going unnoticed. It's not about surgery, makeup, or clothing. It's about how one lives, how one loves, how one resists, how one thinks. It's not something you put on. It's something you go through. And as long as we keep focusing on the bodies instead of the lives of trans women, we will remain trapped in a superficial and regressive fantasy about what it means to be a woman. If the trans movement wants to be taken seriously by feminism, by families, by education, by law, it has to do better. It has to stop selling the idea of womanhood as a product, as a makeover, as a photo shoot. It has to show that trans women are thinkers, workers, creators, fighters, not just models of an exaggerated stereotype. Because as long as the only story being told is that of aesthetic transformation, the world will continue to misunderstand and reject what being trans really means. And that rejection will not be unjustified. It will be the consequence of a narrative that chose fantasy over truth.